Hello and welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, and neighbors who are caring for someone. I'm Felicia Hart and I will be your moderator for today. We begin today's session by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. I am coming to you from Clarington, Ontario, which is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa of the Anishinaabe, known today as the Williams Treaties First Nations. I come to be here through generations of immigration to this land. At the Ontario Caregiver Organization, we are working to better understand how we can be meaningful allies and support the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you haven't already, I encourage you to learn more about the Indigenous peoples and treaties for the land you live and work on through the chat at nativeland.ca after today's session. So our webinar today is called Caring at Home, Getting Connected in the Home and Community Support Sector. We all know that it can be challenging to understand what is available to support you when caring for family members and friends in the community. Finding the right services and support for you and your care recipient can also be overwhelming. Understanding the home and community sector can help you to find the way through the system and access the services you need more easily. Also, knowing the right language to use can help identify your needs and problem solve if any challenges or issues arise. Today, we will hear from Carla Velestigue, a caregiver for her mother who was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease over 14 years ago. She is passionate about increasing the awareness of young caregivers and their important role and contributions to our healthcare system, economy, and local communities. Carla is also a health technology professional with experience in both the private and public sector, along with early stage companies focused on making healthcare more equitable and accessible for all Canadians. We will also hear from Deborah Simon, the CEO of the Ontario Community Support Association. Her background includes work across the health sector in acute care, long-term care, and rehab sectors. Deborah has worked with government as the nursing coordinator for the Ministry of Health and planning bodies on the board and District Health Council in Durham Region. Deborah is a registered nurse with a Bachelor of Arts from York University, as well as an MBA from Athabasca University. Welcome, Carla and Deborah. So at this time, I will ask Carla to please join us, and I'm going to turn it over to her so she can share her experience with us. Carla?
Awesome. Thank you, Felicia. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here as one of the speakers. As Felicia shared, my name is Carla, and I'm a caregiver for my mother living with Parkinson's. I've been an advocate for her in the healthcare system, not only in navigating, but also as a translator. And today, I hope to provide some specific examples of my caregiver experience, barriers and solutions that I've come across in finding and setting up home and community care services for my loved one that is living at home. And of course, I'm more than happy to answer any questions during the Q&A section of the webinar. So, given the progressive nature of my mother's condition, it became extremely important for me to find services that would allow my mother to maintain her independence, her dignity, and her ability to still partake in activities of daily living and activities that she enjoys. But also, just given the long-term involvement of myself as a caregiver, it was extremely important to make sure that I was also doing this for my own mental and physical well-being. And so throughout the years, I've been able to set up a few services for her, and these include an adult day program where she exercises in a supervised group environment, also a specialized public transit for persons with disabilities, and this is how she gets to the adult day program, and in-home care services, specifically with a personal support worker who helps her accomplish activities of daily living. And while I'm very glad that I was able to finally set up those services, prior to getting them up and running, there were some barriers and concerns I've experienced. And so I'm going to share with you some of the conversations that we had, as well as some tips to get these started. So given the early diagnosis. This meant that I was navigating services within an age-related limitation. And so while my mother was not over 65, she also wasn't under 30 years old and consider a young adult. So this created another layer in getting her access to these community services. And while the early diagnosis might be a unique challenge to my situation, what I learned and what I think is extremely important for us as caregivers is advocacy. And so what this means is being able to listen to our loved ones, understand their needs, and understand where they're coming from, and then in turn, be able to communicate this across to the care providers that are around her so that there's a mutual understanding of what the person needs to continue living a fulfilling life. And so I know within our current system, it doesn't necessarily encourage us to have active and reciprocal conversations around care, but as a caregiver, it's extremely important for us to really open those conversations. And so for me, this meant having those conversations that while my mother is not 65 yet, her needs are of a person who is 65. And so it forced me to explore other exceptions in certain age limitations that were in place, or even find alternate services that would support her needs until she gets to that age range. Part of this as well that I found through my experience is that advocacy also means asking questions and uncovering information. And so I ask questions to every healthcare provider that I interact with, any community service coordinator, even administrative staff, because they have a ton of knowledge and information. And this has really helped me to really uncover what's out there, what exists out there. And while things might not be applicable now, they've even helped me to figure out and learn things to keep in mind in the future as my mother's condition advances. And of course, while sometimes we were able to actually access certain services, like the ones that I've shared that we've been able to put in place, a lot of times we weren't able to, and a lot of times that door was closed for us. But I do want to remind everyone here, and I always remind myself that it's not necessarily a provider closing the door on me personally. Most of the time, these are factors that are outside of their control as part of the healthcare system. And I know it can be quite frustrating, especially when you're trying to navigate through the healthcare system for our loved ones. But it was extremely important for me to remind myself never to have these conversations from a confrontational perspective, but always remaining open, friendly, and really trying to stay focused on learning what's out there, and also building relationships with those providers and those individuals. And what I mean by that is, because the door was closed at the time, it doesn't necessarily mean that that door for those services are closed forever. I think for a lot of medical conditions, they're continuously evolving and the needs are also changing over time. And so for me, that meant sometimes reopening those conversations and having frank and direct discussions about the changes in everyday needs and gaps in the supports required for my mother to continue her activities of daily living independently. So as a caregiver, and again, this goes back to the idea of that advocacy, it was also being aware that my understanding of my mother's day-to-day is completely different to that of a provider, just given my close involvement with her day-to-day. So it was extremely important for me to be able to fill in the gaps, share context, and really provide a full picture of my mother and her needs on things that might not necessarily be picked up from an appointment or an assessment with a provider or a coordinator. And while again, there isn't always a solution that can be put in place, I think it was just the ability to be able to bring attention to these changes and highlight what my mother needs, that as a caregiver could really open up doors for potential services to put in place until something more permanent can actually open up in the future. And now I actually want to shift the focus more towards some of the hesitations and conversations that had to be put in place at home with my mother and my family, and when it came to setting up these services. So there was, of course, original hesitation for my mother in terms of introducing a stranger into the home and introducing strangers into her everyday routine. And so it was extremely important to have those conversations, to share with her the benefits of what these services would entail, and not only for my mother, but also for myself as a caregiver. And so now, to ensure that there is a smooth transition and even that openness to change, a tip that I've started doing is I've actually tried to make sure that there is a good foundation right from the get-go. So on the first day of a new PSW, so personal support worker who is visiting at home, or the first day of a day program, I try to facilitate the introduction. I try to provide them with a summary of my mother's needs, her standard behaviors, any mobility limitations, and even language barriers, such that the individuals providing the services are aware, have a better understanding of my mother. And in turn, my mom actually feels like these people are open to forming a routine with her and actually have an understanding of who she is outside of just her medical diagnosis. Something else as well, which I think for us caregivers is extremely important, is we get bombarded with so much information and there's so much to track and to share when it comes to our loved ones. And so I think it's extremely easy, at least for myself, I found to get overwhelmed. And so it became very, very important to stay organized. And what I mean by this is I now have a small journal and even a living document on my computer where I keep track of the phone numbers, names of the programs, a small description of what the program is, and even the staff who were supporting us. And I think this is also extremely important with services that we're currently referred to and awaiting to, so that I don't lose track of them and I can check in on them temporarily so that they don't just kind of disappear from my list and list of 1,000 things to do in my mind. And lastly, another hesitation that I wanted to share here, and I think was really important, was at the beginning of these services, I was actually hesitant of not being physically in the same space as my mother, should she require support. And so to be able to get over that, it's really helped me in building relationships with the people that are supporting my mother in the community. And also knowing that these are professionals, these are people who know what they're doing, this is their job. And so in turn, I've now learned to trust them. There's also the ability to incorporate technology into kind of giving myself that peace of mind. And so, for example, for activities outside of the home, I actually set my mom up with an AirTag, which is actually kind of a small button-shaped tracking device that works in Bluetooth. And this has been extremely helpful in giving me the ability to know the physical location of where my mother is. And in turn, she actually knows that I have a way to connect with her, have a way to reach her in case of any unexpected situation taking place. But as I reflect through really my whole journey and experience of continuing to set up these home and community services for my mother living at home, I think the most important one is being aware that it's not always perfect. It's a work in progress. It involves multiple people who are contributing to my mom's well-being. And I think we're all aware our healthcare system is under a strain, fragmented at times, but really the staff out there are doing their best to support people in their communities and at home. And so I'm now being understanding and accepting that they're really trying their best. Things might not always be perfect, but I do know that my mom is actually getting the support she needs. And in turn, it allows me to continue living my life as well, outside of just being a caregiver. And so as I wrap up my thoughts and as I reflect on my experience and really the benefits that I've had, I would definitely say that some of the biggest benefits have really been on reducing that social isolation. And this is for both myself as a caregiver, but also for my mother. She's now able to interact with other people outside of just myself on the day-to-day. And she's also able to really build relationships and be able to have conversations with other people outside of just her family. This has also in turn allowed my mother to have more structure in her days, so she knows what to expect, and then she actually looks forward to activities that she knows she enjoys. And in turn, as a caregiver, this has been extremely important in giving me the ability to depend on this free time. And so whether it's a few hours of focused work, running an errand, even heading to my own doctor's appointment, it's really allowing me the ability to focus on other things and thrive in my personal and professional life outside of just being a caregiver, and still knowing that my mother is getting the supports and care that she needs. But I think most importantly, and really the biggest benefit of setting up these home and community care services for my mother has really the ability that it's allowed her to maintain her independence, her dignity, and her ability to still partake in activities that she enjoys while getting the support that she needs so that she's safe out in the community and also safe here at home with us. And so for now, those are some of the tidbits that I hope are helpful to you as a caregiver navigating the space. I provided here a short summary, so really focus on advocating, respectfully asking questions, being open to conversations, preparing and setting up a good foundation, staying organized, when possible, incorporating technology. And I think the biggest one for me has been really accept that it's always a work in progress. So thank you, everyone. And of course, happy to answer any questions during the Q&A period.
Carla, thank you so very much for sharing your experience with us today. Just talking through what you and your family have gone through in this process and all of the tips and strategies you've learned along the way is incredibly helpful. So thank you again. So at this time, we will now be hearing from Deborah Simon to learn more about the home and community care sector. Deborah, I now invite you to join us on camera.
Thank you, Felicia, very much. And thanks to Carla for a really great overview from her perspective. I'll just start off by thanking the Ontario Caregiver Organization for inviting OCSA to participate in this webinar. It's really a pleasure to be able to speak to you as caregivers about the power of support, how home and community care helps you and your loved ones. And it was great to see the poll results and see that many of you are supporting loved ones, or unpaid support for loved ones in the community. So next slide, please. I put this slide up because it really, in my opinion, expresses the feeling sometimes of caregiving. It's not easy. And oftentimes when you're providing care for a loved one at home, it really can feel like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. And I know this because I myself, several years ago, had to try and set up services for care for my dad. He was needing Meals on Wheels. He was needing some transportation. And I considered myself somewhat of an expert in the system. However, I had challenges really looking for those services. There is a whole lot of complexity in our system, and I'm sure many of you will, in your questions, express some of that. And so it does take a lot of unnecessary work, I'd say, at this point for organizing services. But there are some great tips, as Carla has started to talk about, around how you can support your loved one every day. So next slide, please. So we looked at OCO's Spotlight report, and I think this again will be no surprise to many of you who are listening that 31% of caregivers provide more than 10 hours per week of care. And that is a big jump from what happened prior to the pandemic. It's up about 26% from pre-pandemic. So clearly more and more people are providing care in the home. And 50% of caregivers are in desperate need of a break, but they really are having great difficulty finding additional support or time for themselves. Home and community care itself is really predicated on support that comes from caregivers. And as Carla was talking about, even though you can get hours of care from the home and community care system, the bulk of the care requirements are really on the backs of caregivers and themselves. So finding that balance and being able to get the services and provide the care, but at the same time, providing care for yourself is really, really important. So as what we have in home care really is just a fraction of what the care requirements really are. And I just want to say that we recognize and value and want to say thank you to all of you who are caregiving for the really amazing job that you do in supporting families, your own families and loved ones. So next slide, please. So who is OCSA? I'll start off by saying right away that we are not a service provider. We don't deliver services directly ourselves, but we actually represent about 220 not-for-profit organizations across the province. And those organizations provide home care and community support services and care for people who have disabilities. And really the goal and mandate of our association and of many of these organizations is to allow people to live as independently as they can in their own homes and their communities for as long as possible. And that could be until end of life. So it is certainly becoming and always has been, in our opinion, a really important provision of care in the community. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the complexity of the services under home and community care. And as Carla was saying, there's a lot of information, and I'm going to try and simplify it as best I can and trying to explain some of the sort of more common terms that you might hear when you're talking to folks who deliver home and community care. So we are, as a sector, divided into 3 large service areas. And these are terms that you might hear about. So there's home care, and I will go into explaining each one of these services. There's community support, and there's independent living. And all 3 of these areas are very important and make up what is known as home and community care across the province. And just to give you a sense of how much care is being delivered, we have over 1 million Ontarians who are currently receiving home and community services. And we know, given the large numbers of folks who are aging in place, that need is going to grow exponentially over the next few years. Next slide, please. So just going to take a little peek at what home care services are. And many of you will have touched these services in your care experience. So home care services, generally speaking, are services that actually are provided through an agency that actually contracts with a number of organizations to deliver certain services. So the services are listed in front of you, and I won't read them all, and many of them will be somewhat familiar to you. Personal support services of that list is probably the largest. It's the largest service provision that home care provides. Probably an estimation, it keeps growing, close to about 70% of the services delivered under home care is personal support. But there are other services such as nursing and physio and other services that all fall under that category. Next slide, please. So home care is funded through the Ministry of Health in Ontario, and 100% of the services provided through home care are funded by the government. So that means that individuals who are receiving home care don't have a client copay. However, that there are limitations to the amount of home care that is provided, and that in itself is somewhat controversial. And many people choose to add on additional services in addition to what the publicly funded government services are provided by privately purchasing additional hours of care. Next slide, please. So community support services, and historically, community support services has been a provision of services primarily for seniors, although there are services that do have a much more expanded age eligibility, but there is a wide range of these services. And the complexity around CSS services, as we like to call it, is that the names of some of these programs may vary in different parts of the province. So what one community might call an adult day program might be called something different. It might be more localized. It might be the Temiskaming Alzheimer's support program. So that just adds to the complexity. And I have just listed on this slide a number of the programs that are delivered, some of the larger programs that are delivered under CSS, but there are more programs than this that are actually provided for people in their communities. So some of the ones that are most commonly known would be our Meals on Wheels program, or the meal delivery services. There's Meals to Wheels, there's Wheels to Meals. They use different terms, friendly visiting, adult day programs, as I mentioned, and homemaking services. So all of these services can be available under the banner of CSS. Next slide, please. So unlike home care services, CSS services are partially funded by government. Many of these programs are supported through fundraising and client fees. So you could see from the pie chart there that of all of the costs, all of the money that comes into community support services, 68% of it comes from the government, and 31% of it comes from either a client fee or fundraising. And that will vary depending on the program and depending on parts of the province. So an example would be that you might hear about a local community support program doing some fundraising, pie sales, those kinds of things. And all of that money in community support programs, because they're not-for-profit organizations, actually gets churned back into providing services. So it's a very important component of what service delivery looks like for community support services. The volunteer component is also a very important piece because many people in local CSS are volunteers. They give back. They want to give back to their communities by providing either driver services, or many people deliver meals. And I think, you know, the beauty of volunteerism around CSS is that many of the volunteers get back just as much as they give in terms of what they do in their communities. And it's and I think it's how community works best. Next slide, please. So most co-payments, when we talk about the client fees, are generally on a sliding scale. And again, that can vary, and really dependent oftentimes on what the client can pay, and oftentimes on what the availability of funds are from fundraising and government fees. So below are just a few examples of services that have copay arrangements. So Meals on Wheels, there's often a fee attached to that, adult day programs as well, and transportation services. Next slide, please. Some of the services that don't have copay arrangements could include things like assisted living for frail seniors. So this is where someone might be living in an apartment block or an apartment building, and they receive personal support services coming in to allow them to be independent in their homes. Many of those kinds of programs are fully paid for by government, and things like friendly visiting sometimes are also covered. You don't pay for those services. Next slide, please. So independent living is a service that isn't as commonly known as part of community support services, but is a very important part of how many Ontarians stay independent in their communities. So this will include things like attended outreach. So someone who has a physical disability living in their own apartment or home could have somebody come in, like a personal support worker, and help them with bathing or feeding or other even medically related services, and are again able to direct the care in their own homes. There's supportive housing programs, again, where a building might be serviced by some personal support workers or attendant care workers, and acquired brain injuries, people who've had head injuries who might require care and are living in the communities. The funding structure is much the same as CSS. Biggest difference between independent living services and CSS is really around the philosophy of the client. In most cases in these situations are really directing the care, and the attendants are the arms and legs of the clients themselves. So next slide, please. So here you see how home and community care can support caregivers. And from this perspective, I think sometimes we talk about respite services, services that will allow, as Carla talked about, caregivers to be able to go off and do other kinds of things so that they themselves can refresh and renew themselves in order to be able to provide the care to their loved ones. So some of the more traditional ones would be sort of caregiver support or respite care that many CSS organizations will provide. And there are things like overnight respite where occasionally a caregiver might want to be away for a longer period of time, and you can have support care for your loved one in a facility where they would be able to be cared for fully while you're not there. But there are other services that are not as known as respite, but would also provide the same kind of support for caregivers. So things like Meals on Wheels that people can qualify for, or transportation services, how to get back and forth for medical appointments, or even housekeeping services that are sometimes offered and available through many of the CSS organizations. All of these can support people to be able to allow their loved ones to stay independent at home. Next slide, please. So this myriad of services, how does one go about finding them? And I think this is the challenge for caregivers. And I think Carla alluded to it in her talk about trying to be organized and pull everything together. But just finding services oftentimes can be really, really difficult. We have been working with a provider by the name of CareDove, and CareDove is a search site that we have on our website that allows people to find community support services wherever they may be in the province of Ontario using a web-based interface. So what you're able to do with CareDove, and you can see, I know the print is really small, apologies for that. But you'll see when you go into the CareDove site that there could be a list of services, or you can pull up the service that you're looking for by typing it into the entry area under the search key. And you can put in your postal code. And what CareDove will do is that it will pull all of the services that list under that name in your locale up for you. And the CareDove service is based on geography. So the postal code will really define exactly what area the services are. That doesn't oftentimes translate into the availability of services. So once you get the name of the organization, you're able to either online book the service that you need, or call them and speak to them about what services might be available for you. It is used pretty extensively in many parts of the province. It is available through our website, but you will often see that some of the 311 and 211 services across the provinces are also using CareDove as one of their tools to be able to help find services. So what are the takeaways? It's challenging, and we know that more and more of the communities who provide CSS services are really trying to centralize these services. So it makes it easier for you as a caregiver to try and find those services wherever they may be. This is a work in progress, but there are many, many other ways of finding these same kinds of supports, even through reaching out to these organizations themselves. They know their communities and they know people who are in need of services, and they're usually very helpful in being able to provide that connection. And I know it does, again, feel like you're jumping out without a parachute, but absolutely the home and community care system and services is absolutely there to try and help you and support you in your care needs. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much, and look forward to hearing any of your questions in the question and answer period.
Deborah, thank you so very much for taking the time to walk through this with us. That was incredibly helpful, and you really helped to clarify the different types of services that are available and also how we can find them. So thank you very much for that. So at this time, I'm now going to get into a little bit about communicating with providers. So we've heard an experience from Carla with her family and caring for her mother, how they work through the system, how they found the right supports. And now Deborah has given us that overview of what's available out there in the community. How can we find it? How can we get connected? So many of you on the line today may already be working alongside providers in the community, or maybe you're just starting out. Maybe you've been working with them for a great deal of time. And one of the things that always comes into play, of course, with any relationship, and especially when you have multiple providers providing care, is that communication strategy, right? And I know Carla gave some really nice examples of this too, and how when she was able to really break down some strategies on how best to communicate with providers, that's when things really started to happen, right? So it is incredibly important for all of us to be prepared with effective communication strategies and skills. And so sometimes, the unexpected happens, needs change, things can get stressful and frustrating. And so having some effective communication tips in mind can really help ensure that your needs as a caregiver, as well as the needs of the person you care for, are heard and understood. Because that's usually where things can get tricky, right? As if you feel like the needs have shifted and you're not able to have your needs heard. Also, this can provide us the ability to be solution focused during challenging times. And hopefully everyone is therefore set up for success in that situation. Now, of course, we're not saying that everything's on the caregiver. Everyone's got to meet halfway in this, but being prepared for these situations and how to best communicate can really be of help. So if we just break it down to the basics just for a moment here, really thinking through what are the verbal cues? How are you showing up when it comes to word choice, tone, pitch, pace, volume? All of these things affect us, right? Thinking about the nonverbal side of things, body language. So any type of facial expressions, gestures, stance, hand placement, these things that we just naturally do and rarely think about each day when we're communicating with others. This is how we're showing to the other person. If you're on the phone, then of course it's going to be all about that word choice and tone. In person, the body language is going to really show through. But of course, it can also tell us a little bit about what the other person is feeling in that moment too. So really keeping an eye on some of those cues is a good place to start. Now, we just have a few minutes today, so we're going to break this down into some key areas. And so we've got 5 main communication strategies here that I'm going to work through briefly. And of course, some of this may come very naturally. It may not be a super aha moment, but the hope is that through this and going through each of these steps, it might help us think a little bit more about how we are connecting with providers, connecting with others on the care team, and what we can do to really be prepared. Now, please do keep in mind that the strategies we're talking about here are not intended for emergency situations when there is an immediate health risk, abuse, or other urgent needs requiring emergency service intervention. These are really here to help think about how to best show up in conversations as you're communicating new needs or any type of challenges that are arising for the care that's provided and received. So let's start with identifying needs and challenges. Now, one thing that we're going to note is that whenever possible, it's really nice to be able to collaborate with the person that you're caring for. See how they're feeling about things, see how whether or not they feel their needs are being met, and then also make sure that you're taking the time to think about your needs as a caregiver and the things that you're noticing in the situation. If you have an opportunity to jot some of this down before you're going into a conversation with someone, whether it's on the computer or just on a piece of paper, again, this can really help you fully think through what the needs are and where you feel like those aren't being met. Or maybe there's been a change. Maybe a situation has occurred that was unsatisfactory or that you are feeling really frustrated about. So taking the time to think through some of these questions and trying to see that bigger picture could be really helpful. The other thing to consider is that sometimes there are future needs that you can plan ahead for and give a heads up to the care provider or community service support about what might happen next in the condition or the illness phase for the person that you care for. And then you have to consider, are these needs matching the service that is currently provided? Is it out of the current service provider scope? Because sometimes that can happen too. And then you need to pivot a little bit when it comes to thinking about other services. And Deborah gave a really great example of what that looks like. And then what are your true perceived challenges regarding the care needs, quality of care, and the communication structure? So the next step after that, now that you might have a very long list of needs, is to really think about the top 2 to 3 from your list and give really key examples of what that looks like. If you're going to be communicating about a specific situation, what was the challenge that was faced? Who, what, when? You really want to think through all of that and get the facts together, right, as you're preparing for connecting with the providers. And then what is the impact of any of these challenges or these unmet needs on both yourself and the person you care for? So from there, we really start to get a plan of action together, right? And I know there are going to be times when you need to act quickly on things, so it's going to be hard to do this. But even if you take a few minutes to touch on a couple of these questions to prepare for a conversation, it's really going to help you be ready to keep it clear and concise when it comes time to connect. So through this, you can really think about, what are the main goals here? What do I need to happen next? How am I going to make sure that this is getting through in a respectful way? And then also making sure that you're looking at any of the feedback policies and processes that that service provider has and following those through. Also, is this something that is it urgent? You have to phone right away? Can you request a meeting to give everyone an opportunity to think through some strategies together? So once we get all of our information, we're thinking through our strategy, our goals, the major challenges, this is when we're ready to make that connection. So again, thinking about that feedback process. Are you connecting directly with the care professional just to give them an opportunity to work with you on whatever challenges that you're facing, or some of those needs that are going unmet? Do you need to speak with the care coordinator? What is the policy on that? And then, of course, and again, Carla spoke to this so well, trying to make sure that you can bring forward any concerns calmly and concisely. And then you want to really stick to those facts and then the impact that it's having, right? So again, this gives that other person on the other side an opportunity to do their best too, and to meet you halfway. Sometimes you're not going to get everything that you ask for from one particular service, but maybe there could be some opportunities to be creative together and build some solutions as a team. And then it's important too, as you're working through all of this at the end of your conversation, to ask what steps are going to happen next and when you might expect a follow-up. It could be that the person you're speaking to needs some time to consider this, needs some time to work things out with the team. And if they can't help you, maybe they're going to come up with some ideas of who could, right? And who they could connect you to really look at some of those needs that you've identified. And of course, just like any situation, we definitely want to take a little time to reassess, right? So did you really feel like your message got across? Do you have any follow-up items that you want to work on? Is there another meeting or call required? And just using that process there to really make sure that the needs were expressed and understood. And of course, we also want to make sure that we give things a chance, right? So if there was a challenging situation that you've identified, maybe give it a chance over the next few times that you're accessing the service to see what changes are there. And then you can determine if more action is required after that. And just a reminder, Deborah spoke to the OCSA database that's available to find services near you. We also have our 24/7 caregiver helpline that can help match you to services in your community as well. And then we have a number of different toolkits on our website that you can access for free to help work through some of these more difficult conversations, collecting that information that we spoke about. So we are now at the time for our Q&A and our discussion. And at this time, I would please invite Deborah and Carla to join us again as our panelists now. Thank you so much. So we do have some time for questions from our audience now. If you do have any questions for Carla and Deborah, please do put them into the chat box and then we can work through these together. And it looks like we've got a few already. So one question that's coming through here that I think would be nice to start with is for either one of our panelists, do you have any suggestions on how caregivers can manage care needs while being on a list? So any wait lists that they are on right now?
I can start if that's okay. I think, caregiving is, as I had mentioned in my presentation, the services that are available through home and community care are just really a fraction of the services that are available that are provided to people. As Carla's talking about in terms of care for her mother and others. Caregiving goes beyond sort of the hours that you can get from home and community care. And so what I would say is that if you're on the list waiting for Meals on Wheels, that you continue to see whether or not there might be other supports in your community that might have, faith groups or others that might be able to support your needs while you're waiting for something more organized through community support or transportation. It is still a myriad of sources that you have to check sometimes to find out if there are other means while you're waiting for, you've got your name on a proper list. But I think, it's worth the sort of delving into to see if beyond what you've already tapped yourself into for a wait list, there might be something else in your community. Carla, I don't know if you have another suggestion.
Yeah, I would say I'm building off what Deborah just shared. It would be asking questions about what alternate programs might be available. So I also, for my mother, found myself on very long wait list to be able to actually get some service set up. But really going back to having those conversations, being very transparent about what are the needs for both my mother, but myself as a caregiver. And sometimes that uncovered more local community programs that were available that were able to maybe not necessarily fill the needs that we needed, but at least provide some sort of support. So I would probably say that's another question, is just really asking questions and seeing, is there something that could be temporary put in place until those more permanent services are actually able to be put in place for the long term.
Thank you so much for addressing that question. That was really helpful. So we do have a couple of comments as well. And one thing that I just wanted to share is that there was a comment that said, someone please share this information. Community care coordinators for home and community care support services, previously known as the LHIN and CCAC, are the link for all these service areas discussed, directly done by assessment or indirectly by linking with referrals. Please call them anytime for assistance. I think that's a really important reminder.
Yeah.
Yes. There's also another comment here from one of our audience members just saying that they understand that there are a lot of challenges and issues throughout the healthcare system, but they at times are feeling really frustrated by the fact that there just isn't enough staff to provide any more support, and they're having a really hard time accessing respite care or additional hours, and paid care, of course, is very cost prohibitive. So I think it is important to address this comment because I know a lot of people can feel this way. But the hope is, maybe through some of the ideas that you shared, Deborah and Carla, that there might be some other options there for them.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. And I actually want to say that not only did I make the comment that caregiving is really challenging, but in addition to everything else, we really have limited resources. And part of what Ontario Community Support Association does, and I know to some degree OCO does, is really that advocacy for more services. We really need more services in the community, and we need to have those services bolstered up more, clearly to support people's needs. The pandemic has been pretty hard on the system, not only just on paid professionals like personal support workers, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, but on volunteers, because many of the services that I talked about under community support, they have been traditionally delivered by volunteers, and many of those volunteers themselves are at risk in the community in terms of what we've experienced through COVID and other viral diseases. So I think, we are challenged by that, but that is our work, is to continue to keep advocating for the services so that people can continue to stay in their homes where they want to be.
Absolutely. We're also getting some questions about, sometimes case managers or care coordinators don't have an opportunity or maybe the capacity to get back to people when they need it. And so I'm wondering, I know that a lot of organizations also have a patient relations or client relations coordinator available on staff to assist with some of the back and forth when capacity can be a challenge. But do we have any other ideas of how a caregiver could approach that if they're just not hearing back? Of course, we're all trying to be patient. We know everyone's doing their best, but any other ideas for how to work through that challenge?
I would say something that I found helpful for myself was just calling into kind of the general number and trying to find other ways to communicate with a care coordinator. So sometimes, for example, phone calls might not be the best way to reach them. And I actually found maybe email was the best way to get in touch with them. Even in a way that myself, so I work full time. So sometimes for me, it was challenging to take a call during 9 to 5, and actually being able to communicate with them via email then allowed me the flexibility to respond to them after hours and still get some movement. I would probably also say, building on what Alicia just shared, certain programs or services do have a patient or caregiver contact number, trying to go through them, trying to kind of start those conversations. And it really goes back to the idea of building those relationships and trying to open up doors to try to get those services in. And I know it's quite frustrating as a caregiver when you're not really getting the answers or a call back or feel like you're being heard. And sometimes it's just maybe trying to remind yourself that you're living day in and day out. And so how can you communicate that across to the individual? But again, not really coming across in a kind of rude way or trying to blame them for not getting back to you, but more so trying to come across with them in terms of like, what are your needs and how it's impacting you and how it's impacting your loved one. So I think it's really focused on not being confrontational, but trying to focus on build those relationships and find a way. It's really a work in progress.
Thank you, Carla. So well said. There's another question here. What is the difference between OCSA and CCAC?
OCSA. Okay, so our organization and the CCACs, I think, okay. It is a real alphabet soup out there. That's the first challenge, I think. So Ontario, our organization is an organization that represents these not-for-profit home and community care organizations across the province in discussions with generally speaking with government. And what we do is we're an advocacy organization. We do some government relations, and we support these organizations that deliver the services. So our role is really to support our members and to try and help develop policies that will deliver more home and community care services. The CCACs, which have changed their names now 3 times, they became LHINs and now they're HCCSS, are a government arm of agencies that actually broker the services of home and community care. So they would purchase services from a home and community care organization that we represent to deliver in a particular part of the community. So they are really the sort of overseer and funder of services in the various locations across the province.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I do want to try and squeeze in one last quick question here, if that's okay. There was a question as to whether or not assisted living or supportive housing can be searched for on CareDove, as the caregiver was unable to find when just kind of trying out that site.
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question, because when I seen the question came up, I went into CareDove, and I live in the Pickering area, and I put my postal code in and I typed in supportive housing, and I got a whole list of names. And assisted living services are actually overseen by the HCCSS, or what was CCACs before. So that comment about calling your local HCCSS and asking about assisted living would be the best strategy to find those services. But absolutely, you can definitely find supportive housing through CareDove.
Thank you, Deborah. Really appreciate that. And also I did see some comments about juggling work and caregiving, so I just want to put out one thing there. We do have some support materials available for working caregivers. So if that's something you're interested in, we would be happy to connect afterwards on that. And also we had a suggestion from the audience too, to work with general practitioners whenever you can, because they can also be really helpful in pushing things forward when you're having some hard times getting the right services. So that is all the time we have for today. That went by so fast, but I want to thank you, Carla and Deborah, for joining us. Carla, thank you so much for being open about your personal caregiving experience and providing those wonderful tips and strategies. And Deborah, thank you for sharing more about the home and community care sector and ways for caregivers to find what they need and working through some of those key challenges.